From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Consider This with Kathy Wyatt, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
A wildfire in central Nebraska still raging more than 24 hours after this one started. More than a dozen fire departments called to the scene after a lawnmower actually sparked a small fire. It was so windy, though, those flames took off. See, spreading to more than 70,000 acres. The governor, in fact, declaring a state of emergency until that fire is under control.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 27th season and this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, wildfires in Nebraska. We have two guests joining us to talk more about it. John Erickson is with me here in the studio. John is the state forester and director for the Nebraska Forest Service. And from O'Neill, Nebraska, Roger Miller is standing by via Zoom. Roger is the fire chief for O'Neill Fire and Rescue. Thank you both so much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Roger, I want to start with you and your thoughts on that opening video.
We knew that day was going to be a critical fire weather day due to the conditions that we're going to have, higher than normal temperatures, very gusty winds, and low humidity. Probably around 4 o'clock, I was notified that they were needing help down there. So we activated the Boyd Holt Wildland Task Force, and we responded down there with 6 pieces of equipment to help out Monday night into Tuesday morning.
Wow, thank you. John, what is the story behind that Betty's Way fire?
Yeah, really the issue with the fire started back in the late summer and fall of the previous year. If we look at the precipitation that happened during that time, we kept our grasses green during the fall up until the first frost. Mm-hmm. And that meant those grasses were continuing to grow during that period of time, and it resulted in more fuel out there on the grounds than normal. And then you take the winter season where we had less snow on the ground than perhaps was normal, and you've got a situation where our fuels end up being dry. As Roger said, it was warm, the humidities were low, the wind was high, and it just took a spark from the lawnmower hitting a rock that led to that fire taking off and burning nearly 70,000 acres.
How common is a wildfire like that?
Wildfires in Nebraska are becoming more and more common like this. We've seen fires down in south central Nebraska the last couple of years, burning 40,000 acres at a time. And it's a similar situation where the conditions are right, the wind is blowing, the temperatures are warm, and the humidity is low. And something happens that allows those fires to spark, whether it's chains dragging on a vehicle going down the road. But we're seeing more and more of these fires happening over the years, and they're getting closer together. So we've gone from a situation where we normally would have a few weeks in the spring and late summer to early fall would be our fire season, to situations where we're seeing large fires every month throughout the year. So it becomes more of a fire year at that point in time.
Wow, and we're talking about a lot of acres being burned here. You guys have actually been tracking this for quite some time. We want to put a graphic up for our viewers so that they can see. And as we're looking at that, John, tell us what's important to know.
Okay, so the Nebraska Forest Service has been tracking the number of acres burned over the last 60 years, so since 1964. And in Nebraska, a large fire season would be anything that exceeds 100,000 acres. And if you look at the first 30 years of the graph that's there in front of you, you'll notice that there were 2 large fire seasons, about 15 years apart between those times. And then in '94, things started getting closer and closer and closer together. And you see those peaks being somewhere between 5 and 6 years. And as we get closer to where we are now, we're actually well on our way to our 3rd big fire season in a row. So They're getting closer together. In 2012, we had our largest fire season ever in the state, and that consumed just over 500,000 acres.
We have to talk about impact here. When we look at a graph like that, talk about the impact to the state of Nebraska.
Yeah, there are many different impacts. You know, if we look back at the 702 fires and 739 fires from 2022, lots of departments came together to support those. In the meantime, you know, those folks are away from their homes, they're away from their jobs, they're there for many hours to several days. In 22, we had, unfortunately, several firefighters were lost in those fires. You have the resources in the state. At the 739 fire, there were multiple fires happening in the state, so the state resources get spread out too. And then you have the impact to the landowners and the homeowners, where these fires are moving so quickly that they have barely enough time to get out of the way of those fires themselves. But you lose your fences, you lose your infrastructure, you lose your grazing that would be available right now, and in some cases we lose the homes too, and it's just an awful situation for those folks.
And the loss is hard enough. Then you have to think about how on earth do we even begin to start over, right? How long have you been doing what you're doing?
I've been in forestry for about 33 years now.
Okay.
I've been the state forester for the last 7.
Tell us about the service.
Okay, the Nebraska Forest Service is a state agency that's contained within the Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We have 5 mandates that we're asked to fulfill. One is our rural forestry program, where we're out working with rural landowners on what they can do to improve their forests. We have the wildland fire protection and prevention aspect, where we might be doing work in around a community or working around a farm or ranch or a series of farm or ranches that to create field breaks for wildfires and provide the support back to the volunteer fire departments. We have a forest health program where our staff are really looking forward to the next problem that's out there that's going to affect our trees. You know, back in 2002, the Nebraska Forest Service and our partners across the state started planning for emerald ash borer as it was moving from Michigan towards Nebraska. It showed up in Nebraska in 2016. Our forest health staff helped folks be prepared for that. We have a community forestry program where our foresters help our communities plan for events like emerald ash borer, but also plan their tree canopy for the community and help them plan on what do we do as our canopy gets older and as they move towards those trees starting to decline, how can they be prepared for those trees to be replaced over time. Then we have a forest products unit too that really looks to work with entrepreneurs and researchers to develop markets for forest products. You know, Nebraska has our forests scattered across the state, and it's one of the most difficult things when it comes to utilizing wood products is having to haul it a long distance. So what could we do to create markets in local areas that allow us to haul that material less distance? So
how did you get involved in all of this, John?
I got involved, you know, it was actually a friend of mine that was in forestry at the time. I happened to be living in Idaho at the time, and there's a lot of forest industry in Idaho, and we got connected. And originally I was going down the wildlife path, and then I moved over into the forestry area and said, you know, this is where I want to be. I want to be in the forest. I want to do things to work with folks to help them achieve their goals on the properties.
I have to ask, because you are in so many different places across the state, and you do have such a unique perspective. So what have you learned about Nebraska that many of us may never encounter because we're doing what we're doing and we are who we are, but you're kind of in the trenches, so to speak?
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned?
Well, one of the things that I find that is pretty interesting here in Nebraska that is, if you go back in our fossil records in the state, you'll find Douglas fir used to grow in parts of Nebraska. Mm-hmm. It's no longer native to Nebraska, but Douglas fir grows here now. There's places it's been planted and it's done quite well. In areas that you might say, there's a big stand of Douglas fir up by the cemetery in Rushville, for instance. Rushville doesn't get enough rain for that Douglas fir to be happy, but those are some big, very good looking trees that are neat to see out there on the landscape.
Very cool. And you're, of course, not doing this all by yourself. With whom do you collaborate?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of folks to help pull together different aspects of this. The natural resource districts are one of our big partners that we work with, and we work with all 23 of them across the state. We work with Nebraska Emergency Management on fire, and that's a big collaboration, and there's folks from NEMA, from Nebraska Forest Service, from the State Fire Marshal's Office that all work together to pull together teams that can go out and provide assistance on wildfires. We work with State Patrol when there's an incident in the state. Mm-hmm. They'll use their drones to identify hot spots and help map the perimeter of the fire. So as the fire is winding down, we can actually see on their images, here are the hot spots of the fire that we need to go out and look at. We work with the U.S. Forest Service and other federal agencies as well. The federal agencies, when things get to a point where they're exceeding the state's capacity, we can reach out to our Great Plains Dispatch and ask for maybe a large air tanker to come in and help us order it through there. And so there's lots of folks that have many pieces, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, how the communities actually pull together when things are happening in there. Lots of times they're providing some sort of shelter, or NGOs providing cots for firefighters to get some rest. The local restaurants feeding those firefighters that are out there. So lots of folks that pull together to help with wildfires.
Well, I was going to ask you, being a part of this for so long, and again, having the perspective that you have, what would you say to somebody outside of Nebraska about our communities? Again, you do have that unique. Talk about that a little bit, all the people you're meeting, and in so many cases, adverse circumstances, and yet we seem to always see these folks rise to the occasion, right?
Yeah, and many of our Nebraskans, when they're called upon for whatever purpose is needed, they're here. They're here to help each other. Yeah. And that's the way Nebraska works. And not everybody out across the country gets that, but it certainly is the case here in Nebraska, where it's neighbor helping neighbor and community helping community, and fire departments helping other fire departments, and everybody pitching in to accomplish a goal.
Well, for the purposes of this program, I do want to talk with you a little bit more about the volunteer fire departments. First of all, how many of those do we have across the state?
There's 478 volunteer or fire departments across the state. 6 of those departments have paid staff. 22 of them have a couple paid members on their staff, and then the rest are all volunteer.
Say that again, John. The rest are all volunteer. So we're talking about approximately how many men and women stepping up to the plate on their own time for something as important as this?
Well, most of those departments have 20 to 30 to 40 people that are associated with them. So you take that number, 450-ish, and multiply it by that, and all those folks are contributing their time to help with protect our state.
Yeah, one of those folks, Roger Miller, we met him earlier in the program. We're going to go back to him now. He is in O'Neill, Nebraska. Now, Roger, besides being the Irish capital of the state, for viewers, especially those who've not been to O'Neill. How would you describe your city?
Well, we survived last weekend. That was our St. Patrick's celebration, so we got through that okay. But we're the largest community between Norfolk and Chadron, and also from Grand Island to the South Dakota state line. We have a community of about 4,250 people, including our rural fire district. Our rural fire district encompasses 460 square miles, plus the town of O'Neill and the village of Inman. Our fire department currently has 28 members. Some of them are 14 EMTs, 17 firefighter EMTs, and then the rest are just straight firefighters. Last year we had a record year on calls. We had over 572, ambulance calls and approximately 60 call outs for the volunteer fire department.
Roger, how did you get involved in this realm?
It was a desire probably to give back to the community. And then again, every time you see a fire truck go by or ambulance, it perked your interest. But pretty much was the desire of the community. And also I'm a licensed electrician, and I knew that that would probably be an asset to belong to a fire department, to use those skills throughout the community to help our neighbors and community members.
You've been doing this for a while, right? How many years?
Yeah, a little longer than John, 37.
It's a contest now. Well, that is fantastic. If I could ask you to rewind back to the time in your life where you were just kind of going along, and then was it a person? Was it an incident? What was it that drew you in to this particular area?
I think it was just my desire to help the community and to get out and do the work that needed to be done to make the community safer and just give back.
Yeah. Roger, talk about a day in your life, because it's not just about this, even though this is so incredibly important. You do other things throughout the day, right? Correct.
As fire chief, you're always doing something to benefit the fire department. On a given day, I brew my coffee, I stop at the laptop, I pull up the North Platte National Weather Service daily webpage. I look at some pertinent information on there. If conditions seem appropriate, I will probably go over to the Nebraska Forest Service Wildland Fire webpage. That gives me a 3-day forecast on humidity, winds, the fire danger, and then I use that information throughout the day to use for issuing burn permits. I'm pretty stringent with the burn permits. If I don't like the conditions in front of me from the information I've gathered, I tend not to issue those permits. It's always kind of nice to keep tabs on the weather and also the fire danger out there. And then after that, I am a licensed electrical contractor, and then I go do my job that pays the bills.
Okay, given all the roles and responsibilities, I'm especially curious about, especially after seeing that opening video and knowing that you were directly involved with that, what type of training must someone have in order to be able to, A, want to get into a truck and go to something like that, but B, they arrive at the scene and they have to know what to do, Roger. So talk about the training.
We have a pretty aggressive training program up here. I encourage everybody to take the training when they can. The good thing with the training is it's provided free of cost. The only thing you're out is your time and also maybe some travel expenses, but the amount of training that they get is invaluable. They can use that on the fire scene to figure out the tactics. The weather fire is very important. You learn that. You learn the topography, how important of a role that plays. And at the end of the day, probably the most important thing is when those firefighters are trained, that makes my job easier, knowing that hopefully everybody can go home that night. And that's a very important thing to look at.
Yeah.
We want to be aggressive out there, but we also want to be very safe if we can.
Understood. Well, with 37 years behind you, I can't even imagine the number of stories that you would have to share with someone like me. But I'm going to ask if you could just maybe pull one that comes to mind as we're having this discussion.
You bet, and I have plenty of stories. But the biggest story that I can probably tell you is how the fire service has changed in that career that I've had, and I hopefully continue to do it for a few more years. But a lot of it is the training that is available now, and also our clothing and equipment that is available to help keep us safe. The equipment has changed a lot. We're better equipped. There's avenues to get the equipment. Up here in O'Neill, we do utilize some Forest Service equipment, and that's obtained at a very minimal cost. But the biggest thing that I see is the equipment has improved, the technology has improved, and the data available to interpret these conditions has improved.
Okay, Roger, we'll get back to you. I do want to go to John because you had alluded to the website. I too went to that website. Really, really good information on there, John. We're going to go ahead and put a visual up for our viewers. And as we're doing that, tell folks what they can expect to find when they get there.
Sure. So this is the Nebraska Wildfire Risk Assessment Portal. And Roger had mentioned that he goes to this, one of the first things in the morning. So you can go on here and you can look at what the relative humidity is projected for today and the next 2 days following. I should say this is a collaboration between the Nebraska Forest Service and the National Weather Service to pull this together. And again, here you go to the fire danger rating, with red being the high risk and green being a low risk. And you can look at what the projected ratings are for the next few days, and what the wind speeds will be here over the next few days. Again, going to a scale of red being the extreme, and even pink would be hurricane force winds over 120 miles an hour. But you can see what's happening here over the next few days. Precipitation as well. You can go in there and see the projected amount of precipitation each of the days for the next 3 days, to give you an idea that if you're doing a prescribed burn or something, how much you can expect to have, or even on a wildfire. And then the maximum daily temperatures are there as well. So you can look at what you might be able to expect over the few days. So the wind, the relative humidity, and the temperature are really the critical issues when you're fighting wildfire out on the scene. So this is right there, looking out several days in advance.
And anybody can go there.
Anybody can go there. It's free to anybody that would like to use it. Wow. So it's a good tool.
You also have good stuff for property owners,
Yeah.
right? So we're going to put that graphic up now.
Okay.
This is fantastic. Anybody with questions can go here. Talk to us about that.
So if you want to go to the Risk Explorer, actually that would be the next step, which actually takes you into this website just a little bit. You can type in your address and say, okay, give me a report on what kind of things I should be doing for my home. So it'll talk about defensible space around your property. It's specific to the fuel types that are in that area and what you might do there. Again, it's free to anybody to use. There were a couple other bullets there, including our community wildfire protection plans, and those efforts are our counties, our emergency managers, our fire departments, and my staff all going together to develop a plan for regional protection plans for that area. And it identifies the different actions that could happen that would benefit that community or those communities in the event of a wildfire. And one of the nice things about that too is there's several grant programs that are built off of that. If there's a current community wildfire protection plan for that area, those counties, those communities are eligible for some federal grants that will help cost share different activities to implement those plans.
Wow. Okay, we have about 3 minutes remaining. I do want to make sure to ask you the question, especially for the viewers watching. If there were one thing that each of us could do to help prevent these wildfires, what would that be, John?
I would say be aware of your surroundings. So if you're out in the wildlands and doing recreation, let's say, and you need to pull your vehicle over and park somewhere, be aware of what you're parking on. So tall grass is bad. If you could find a spot with short grass, that's much better. If you find a place that has bare soil, that's even better. So be aware of those surroundings and be aware of what the forecast is. So if you're looking out at a day where the wind is expected to blow 30 to 40 miles an hour, gusting to 60, your activity should change. You know, don't be in doing things that potentially could spark a fire. And whether it's a mower or it's an ATV and you're out and about in a place where you have a mishap with that ATV, that hot motor comes in contact with grass, and then all of a sudden you have a fire.
Wow. I want to go to Roger one more time in this program, and I want to ask him, because I know you can always use more volunteers to help battle these types of fires and other things as well. Roger, we have about a minute, right?
Okay.
What would you say to an aspiring volunteer out there, somebody thinking about this?
Well, you have to be able to commit some time and resources to be able to do this job. There's really not much planning ahead. That all depends on when the page goes off what you do. You're going to plan on missing some events in your family when you get called out to some events. I also tell my members that sometimes we're going to see people on the worst day they ever had. So, you know, we have to also show compassion and stuff out there. But the biggest thing that I can say is it's a commitment of your time and your energy to the volunteer fire department.
Yeah, talking with Roger Miller and John Erickson today about wildfires in Nebraska. Folks wanting more information can go to Nebraska Forest Service or O'Neill Fire and Rescue. Heck, you can go to both of them if you want. I want to thank my guests for joining me today, for everything that you're doing for our communities. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you for inviting us.
You bet. Our students who are working so hard behind the scenes, and of course to all of you for watching. We will see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television in the School of Communication. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call the UNO School of Communication at 402-554-2600 during regular business hours. Or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.
Coming up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Faded press to a full.